Okay, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Recording in progress. Okay, my name is Aria Maulana Satriyo, and I'm going to talk about child discourse. So, without further ado, for starter, in the years since the first book on child language studies, the researchers have been able to shift focus, placing the child's learning process and productive pragmatic use at the center of their concern. The discourse focus looked at children in naturally occurring settings and activities and paid attention to their speech and communicative practice in these situations. This research went beyond linguistic competence to what became known as the child's acquisitions of communicative competence. So, moving on to language socialization and the acquisitions of discourse. Yeah, language socialization is responsible for highlighting what it means for a young child to participate in meaningful language exchanges and become an active agent in her own or his development. So in the mid 1980s, the focus of studies of language acquisition shifted from grammatical patterns to how language learners are able to participate in members of social groups. The term language socialization came to represent this new focus. Children need both broad culture knowledge about social relationship and understanding of the social identities that define their position in a social world. They also need to be active producers of the linguistic practices that construct these identities. Adult-child discourse, the pragmatics of family lives. The world of the family provides them with their earliest learning experience of how verbal communication affects interpersonal relationships. By participating in family life, children gain practical experience of how talk is used to control, to persuade, or to conceal real intentions. At, and at time constructs status relationships. It is also through family discussions that children first become aware of relationship as a world beyond family. Urban Trip, focusing the pragmatic conventions of family talk, provides important insights into the linguistic means by which interpersonal relationships are negotiated. In role-playing games, children reveal complexities of discourse knowledge necessary for children to become competent communicators. Between Kaite, 2013, examined multimodal transactions used to choreograph and negotiate the ongoing progress of parent-child communication projects. Transitioning from one activity to another requires continuous monitoring as well as participants' display of crucial information about temporal and sequential organization. These means can include gaze, touch, reconfiguration of bodies in two-facing formations, and shepherding the child through touch. In a table talk. A key site for looking at children's complementary roles within the family is in a table conversation. Richard Watt states that the distribution of powers in family can be directly related to members' success in verbal interaction. So, children's discourse have been explored from the point of view of participation of frameworks of family routines. Their place in the social ordering can differ cross-culturally or with other social cultural factors such as social class and birth order. Personhood and self-identity, how children understand their own position in a social world. So, how the child gains a realization of or who she is or he is as a person within a social and cultural world is a critical part of child discourse inquiry. Language is used actively to construct a social identity and self-awareness that comes with the self-reflexiveness made possible through the grammatical, semantic, and pragmatic resource of language. Six different children develop mentally changing uses of self-reference forms between 2 and 3 years of age. But Rick discovers a difference thin orientation between those who habitually use only first-person reference pronoun I and those who use two different forms, I and me or my. These choices do not vary with age or gender, but reflect what could be considered a personal difference to the world. By examining how narratives become linguistically and pragmatically more complex, these studies provide a basis for the understanding of the relationship between a growing narrative and linguistic and the development of the sense of perspective, talk, and the morality of life. What action means to others, whether hurtful or supportive, and what others mean by their words and deeds become the subject of both adult and child peer exchanges. As the growing child engages others with a complex set of relationships, issues of right and wrong arise. Such differences in ways of talking about these matters range from formal expressions of regret for such minor infringements as bodily noise to sanctions against overtly expressing annoyance. Talk about emotions, caring for others' feelings, recognizing your own feelings, and managing your body in socially appropriate ways all have culturally different and conventionally expected ways of expressions. Rules and routines, moral practices in everyday social situations. Morality is not a matter of learning to match behavior to abstract rules or principles, but rather is embedded in and is an outcome of everyday family practices. Two large studies in the US have focused on socialization in the middle-class families in which both parents work. Studies illuminate with how children acquire ideology, values, and ways of being through everyday social interaction with working parents, in family, and other social situations. Children can be socialized to different moral orientations toward acquiring knowledge. Goodwin illustrates how a particular moral stance to knowledge acquisitions. The enjoyable pursuit of knowledge is socialized by arranging forms of participants' framework and positive effect. Next is expressing feelings and politeness. In enacting family relationships during peer play, children will feel and often over-communicate mothers or fathers' squaring talk by scolding, shouting, cajoling, and other expressions of concern. Mothers and other caretakers' expressions of love, joy, annoyance, displays of concerns, and admonishments provide children with moral insights into human relations. Child discourse studies have focused on how children are socialized to appropriate moral conduct and affect displays in classrooms. Kurulski, studying preschool's classroom in Japan, reported observing politeness routines as embody social action. Chikaite followed the socializing interactions between teachers and Somali students in a Swedish first grade classroom. Narrative accounts as everyday morality, narrative form, and topic inclusions. Discourse analysis focuses on the way in which children give narrative sequencing to events, provide coherence to the actions of the story, and attributes motives to themselves and others. As well as providing an emotional evaluation, Blumkulka finds that Israeli and American middle-class families differed in the extent to which they allowed the children to be focus of the storytelling attention. Heath found that working class families valued exaggerations as a display of linguistic competence. Narrative experience helped Narrative experiences help to develop moral sensibility about the consequences of actions for both the self and others. In the past 10 years, narrative research using the language socialization paradigm has expanded to focus on children growing up in transnational and post-colonial settings. For example, Father documents how literacy practices at home and in segregated has a girls and boys school reinforce gender differences. Child-child discourse. Child-child discourse and developmental pragmatics began a new movement in child language research, looking at situationally embedded activities organized by children, studies of children's disputes, teasing, gossip stories, song games, and pretend play that have been viewed recently. Several studies noted that the ingenuity of children making use repetition sound play and other aspects of attuned poetic performance in their play and games. Research began to focus on relating the child knowledge and performance to the social and cultural structures and ideologies that give meaning to an identity to a community. These provide a means for children to negotiate alignments and hierarchy within peer groups. Peer moral taught how norms of the peer group peer group are co-constructed through gossip, teasing, pretend play, and conflict. So there are two ways in here. There are among older peers and play pretend among young children. So as children negotiate how they stand in a relationship to one another during peer disputes and gossip events, they make assessments. Marjorie Goodwin has shown that peers rely on the gossip chain to convey disapproval of others' actions. There are some examples here, such as Eckert found that girls who were members of the popular crowd differentiated themselves through engaging in flamboyant performances and negotiations in pairing. In a group of nerd girls, displays of intelligence were central to the negotiation of identity, and other explanations have been written down. So, and next is teasing, is another genre of competitive interaction that can be used to negotiate peer group hierarchies and norms. In teasing and other forms of playful jabbing and verbal competition, a criticism, threat, or insult is delivered to be addressee, but in a relatively safe venue that blurs the boundary between realist and irrealist and allows tension to be expressed and managed within the group. So the second is there are play pretend among young children. There are several dimensions of pretend play that provide children with resources for negotiating social and moral order within the peer group. In register and role play, the father and the doctor displays their authority through a marker of being in charge. Youth reporters, fathers, and doctors are portrayed as highly authoritative through discourse markers and claims to have the right to change a scene or topic. In multilingual communities, children can draw domain or role association in their play for the languages of sets of languages resource which are contact in their communities. As they do so, they can either reproduce or transform dominant societal discourse. So in the past 10 years or so, the fields of child discourse studies have begun with focus to look at longer trajectories of actions. For example, directive response sequences. Child discourse studies now look at how a place is made for children to exert agency, as through activity contracts. These includes display of affect and attention in the moment, including of those children themselves that become occasion during and themselves influence unfolding adult-child interaction. So that's all from me. If there's any question, please do ask from the comment box down below or directly ask me, whichever you like. Thank you for the attention. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.